Chapter 1. The Quietest Alarm Clock. My alarm clock went off at 6:45 a.m., and for the first time in my adult life, it was the loudest thing on earth. It wasn't a dramatic alarm either. No sirens, no nuclear plant is melting klaxon, just that polite 1980s digital beeping that says, "Good morning, I hope you enjoy commuting and pretending you like coffee." I slacked it and waited for the usual soundtrack to rise up around me. Mr. Kalinsky upstairs dragging a chair like he was trying to sand his floor with furniture, the neighbor's dog barking at a delivery truck, a distant siren, a car horn that lasted too long. Nothing. Silence is not supposed to be that complete. Even at 3 a.m, there's always something. A refrigerator humming, pipes ticking, a drunk yelling at the moon. In 1987 Pittsburgh, silence is basically illegal. I sat up, blinked, and listened harder, as if quiet was a station I could tune out with enough concentration. Nothing. Okay, I said to the empty room, because I've always been the kind of guy who narrates his own confusion. Either I'm dead, or everyone else is. I walked to the window in my boxers and an old concert t-shirt. The street below looked, paused. Cars were parked along the curb like they'd been carefully placed for a parade that never happened. The traffic light at the corner changed from green to yellow to red for nobody. No pedestrians, no buses, no pigeons. I leaned out and took a deep breath. No exhaust, no hot dog cart smell, no cigarette smoke, just the honest scent of asphalt and the faint sweetness of someone's lilac bush, which had been working quietly its whole life and finally got a moment in the spotlight. My first thought, because my brain loves dumb explanations, was that there'd been an overnight snowstorm and the city was buried. Then I noticed the sun, the dry streets, and my own bare legs. My second thought was that a major event had happened and I'd slept through it, like a riot, or an evacuation, or a really aggressive marathon. My third thought, which arrived late because my third thoughts are always the smart ones, was, this is wrong. I threw on jeans, sneakers, and the first button-down I could find that didn't smell like my last attempt at chili. I grabbed my apartment phone and dialed my mother. I didn't even pause to feel guilty about calling at 6:52 a.m. My mother has been awake since the Nixon administration. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answering machine picked up, no click, no hello from a woman who would immediately tell me what I was doing wrong with my life. I hung up and dialed my best friend Mark. He would either answer or, at the very least, let the machine pick up so I could leave something alarming and witty. Nothing. I dialed my boss at the radio station. Nothing. I dialed 911 because that's what the movies do, and I figured the movies owed me one. It rang. Okay, I told the phone. That's a bad sign. I tried the TV next. I twisted the knobs with the confidence of a man who has successfully fixed a rabbit ear problem by smacking the side of the set. The screen warmed up, static, a bright flash, then a color bar test pattern with a tone that made my fillings vibrate. At the bottom of the screen, please stand by. I have been standing by, I said. I'm about to sit down dramatically. I shut it off. The hallway outside my apartment was empty. Mrs. Devine's door across the hall was ajar by an inch. Mrs. Devine never left her door ajar. Mrs. Devine used 3 locks and a chain to defend herself from the terrifying threat of teenagers walking past her apartment. Mrs. Devine? I called, soft at first, like I expected her to leap out and scold me for my tone. It's Ben Carter, from 3B, the one who tried to carry your groceries last month and almost died under the weight of canned peaches. No answer. I nudged the door open with my knuckles. The chain was undone. The living room smelled like floral perfume and cat food. No cat came to investigate. Mrs. Devine's knitting sat half-finished on the couch. A TV tray held a mug of tea with a skim of skin on top. She'd been there recently. Recently enough for the tea to still be tea. The apartment was empty. I backed out and closed the door gently. If you're trespassing in your neighbor's apartment during the apparent end of civilization, you should still be polite about it. Downstairs, the building's front door was unlocked. The lobby had mail scattered near the boxes, like someone had opened them and then simply lost interest in receiving correspondence forever. Outside, the street hit me like a new planet. The city was there. Brick, steel, glass, graffiti, potholes. But there was no life moving through it. No dogs on leashes. No stray cats. No birds on power lines. I stood in the middle of the sidewalk and waved at nothing. Hello? I called. Anybody? I'm taking roll call. My voice came back at me in a weird, clean echo, bouncing between buildings without being swallowed by traffic noise. It sounded too loud. It made me feel like I was breaking a rule. I walked toward Liberty Avenue because if you don't know what to do, you go toward familiar places and hope familiarity explains itself. The corner convenience store had its lights on. The open sign glowed cheerfully, as if the owner was inside, ready to sell me a lottery ticket and judge my choice of gum. The door was unlocked. The radio behind the counter played faintly, some synthy pop song I recognized but couldn't name until the chorus hit because 1987 is basically a continuous chorus. No clerk. I stepped behind the counter and opened the register. It popped with a satisfying caw-ching, as if delighted someone finally appreciated it. There was cash inside, rolled coins, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in wax paper. I stared at it all and realized my heart was doing a strange thing. It wanted to laugh and scream at the same time. Ben, I told myself, you are not robbing a store, you are performing inventory. I took a bottle of water and set $2 on the counter. Then I wrote a note on a receipt pad. PAI, sorry about whatever this is. Ben. I stuck it under the cash drawer like that would protect me from the judgment of the universe. Outside, the traffic light changed again, green for ghosts. I made my way to my car, a dull blue sedan that I'd been threatening to trade in for something cooler, as if cars could be cool and not just metal boxes full of old French fries. I got in, started it, and listened. The engine ran. The radio in my dash whispered static. I pulled onto the road and drove slowly, stopping at every red light out of muscle memory. There was no reason to stop, there were no other cars moving, there were no cops, there were no people. But I stopped anyway, because the first law of being human is doing what you've always done, even when it stops making sense. I passed a bus idling at the curb with its door open. The interior lights were on. A newspaper sat on one of the seats. I pulled over and climbed aboard like a kid sneaking onto a spaceship. Fare, I called to the empty driver's seat. No one told me to have exact change. The bus smelled faintly of rubber and old perfume. It felt wrong to be inside it without a purpose, like wearing someone else's glasses. I got off and continued driving. The radio station was across town, a squat building with a parking lot that always smelled like hot pavement and ambition. I worked there as the chief engineer, which is a fancy way of saying I was the guy who got blamed when the music sounded weird. If anyone in the city would have an explanation, if an explanation existed, it might be in a place built to talk. I pulled into the lot, no cars, no cigarettes crushed near the door, no interns rushing in late. The station's sign still buzzed, WJLK Jolt 103.7 in proud block letters. I stepped out of my car and felt the air settle around me like a blanket. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the hallway lights were on, humming softly, and somewhere deeper in the building I heard the low, comforting whir of machines doing their jobs. The station was alive. I wasn't sure anyone else was. Chapter 2. Dead Air. Radio stations smell like warm dust, ozone, and coffee that's been reheated so many times it has philosophical doubts. I walked down the hallway past framed photos of smiling DJs and promo posters that promised things like Summer Jam and win a Corvette A. The posters looked ridiculous now, like a motivational speech delivered to an empty room. The studio door was cracked open, a thin bar of light spilled out, so did music. If this is a prank, I whispered, it's very committed. I pushed the door open. The main control room was lit up like a Christmas tree. Levels danced on the board. The On Air sign glowed red with confident authority. And the DJ chair was empty. The song playing was Take On Me, which felt both comforting and rude. The world had ended, and the station had decided to go out on the most energetic keyboard riff in human history. I leaned toward the mic on reflex, then stopped. In my head, I heard 100 training sessions. Don't talk on the air unless you mean it. Don't curse. Don't eat near the board. Don't tell the listeners you're panicking. I looked around again, slowly, as if the staff might be hiding behind the cart machine with confetti. No one. No coats on hooks, no half-finished cigarettes in the ashtray outside, no stack of takeout menus. The phone lines lit up on the console, little buttons waiting to be pressed like they were holding their breath. I checked the automation rack. It was running a loop, song, station ID, song, a pre-recorded DJ break, song. The break was from our afternoon guy, Rick Rizzo, whose voice was permanently set to excited to be alive. Jewel 103 Point Zavian, Razor boomed from a speaker. You're cruising with Razor, keeping it hot, keeping it right. I flinched, even though it was a recording. In the quiet of the building, it sounded like someone had just burst into the room. Razor, I told the speaker, if you're the only other voice I get, we need to talk about your volume. I pulled a chair to the board and sat down. The vinyl seat squeaked. It was the first time that day I heard a sound that wasn't mine, and it made my chest tighten with relief and fear in equal measure. First things first, phones. I punched the line that went to the newsroom. Ringing, no answer. I punched the line to the police. Ringing, no answer. I punched the line to the station manager's office. Ringing, no answer. I stared at the blinking lights and thought about how ridiculous it was that my proof of civilization was a row of unpicked up telephones. I grabbed the handset and dialed a number from memory, the local TV station's engineering desk. We used to borrow parts from each other the way neighbors borrow sugar. Blinging. My brain offered a quick, optimistic fantasy. The engineer would answer, irritated, and say, "Ben, where the hell have you been? Everyone's at the stadium. It's free donut day." No answer. I set the handset down gently and looked at the microphone again. The thing about radio is that it's intimate. You talk into a piece of metal and somehow you end up in people's kitchens, in their cars, in the shower. I'd always loved that. I loved being part of the invisible thread that stitched the city together. Now I was staring at the thread and realizing it might be connected to nothing. I leaned in. I said, and my voice came through the studio monitors, loud and immediate. "Hello." Hearing myself made me jump, which is humiliating in an empty building. I cleared my throat and tried again. More confident-like confidence could be faked into existence. "Good morning, Pittsburgh," I said. "This is Ben Carter, and if you're hearing this, congratulations. You are either alive or you're haunting the FM band, which I respect." I listened to the silence after my words. The monitors didn't answer. The building didn't answer. The city certainly didn't answer. I tried to picture an audience. I pictured my mother, arms crossed, listening with narrowed eyes. I pictured Mark, laughing and telling me I was being dramatic. I pictured the guy who called every Friday to complain about our signal strength in Squirrel Hill. So I talked like they were there. "Okay," I continued. "Here's what I know. I woke up this morning and the city is empty. Like, not everybody's at a parade empty. Like, did we all agree to hide from me's empty? I've checked my apartment building, the street, and now the station. No people, no animals, no..." I paused, because my brain had just caught up with my mouth. No animals. In my apartment building, Mrs. Devine's cat hadn't come running. In the street, there were no pigeons. In the parking lot, there weren't even those little moths that always kamikaze themselves into fluorescent lights. That wasn't just everyone went to the mall. That was bigger. I swallowed. "No animals," I repeated more quietly, which is not great. I glanced at the emergency broadcast system panel mounted on the wall. In 1987, we still had EBS, the thing they tested with that tone that makes your soul try to crawl out through your ears. I reached toward the switch, then stopped. If I sent an emergency alert, who would relay it? Who would hear it? Was it possible to embarrass yourself on a national scale when there was no nation listening? "Right," I said to the mic, pivoting hard into humor like it was a life raft. "I'm going to keep the station on. If you're out there, if you're hiding, or stuck, or just taking the world's longest bathroom break tune in, Jolt 103.7, if you can call, the request line is, well, it's the request line. Press buttons until something works. I'm not picky today." I didn't like how my hands shook, so I gave them a job. I grabbed a cassette tape from the desk drawer blank, still in plastic, and popped it into the recorder we used for logging. The little wheels began to turn. "For the record," I said, "this is Ben Carter, June 14th, 1987. I'm recording everything because either someone will find this someday, or I will need proof later that I didn't dream an entire year." I kept talking on and off through the morning, making announcements every 15 minutes between songs. I played everything, pop, rock, old Motown, because if I was going to be the last human, I wasn't going to be the last human with a narrow playlist. At one point, I did a weather report by walking outside and looking up. "It's sunny," I said into the mic when I got back. "Chance of existential dread 100%. I tried a call-in segment because I'm an optimist and also a glutton for emotional pain. "All right," I said, forcing cheer. "First caller, you're on the air. Tell me what's going on." I pushed the line button. Silence. I stared at the phone like it had insulted my mother. "Okay," I said. "Strong opening. Great energy, caller. You're doing terrific." I let the line sit for a second, then clicked it off and filled the gap with a song. Dead air is the cardinal sin of radio. Even at the end of the world, you don't commit sins if you can avoid it. By afternoon, the truth had settled into my bones. No one was coming through those doors, no one was calling, no one was answering. I did a few practical things. I checked the backup generator. Good. I made sure the transmitter was stable. Good. I grabbed every flashlight in the building and tested the batteries. Mostly good, in the way that makes you want to buy batteries and also reminds you the store is probably empty. Then I wandered into the break room. There was a pot of coffee in the machine, cold and thick, a half-open bag of pretzels on the counter, a calendar with June's page flipped and circled in red, staff meeting, 9 a.m. June 14th was a Sunday. I stared at the calendar and laughed, because what else do you do when the universe leaves you a joke and refuses to explain the punchline? They finally scheduled a meeting on a day none of us could attend, I said. I went back to the studio and sat in the DJ chair. For the first time all day, I let myself say it out loud without joking. I think I'm alone. The meters kept bouncing. Razor's pre-recorded voice whooped between songs. The Owen Air sign glowed like a stubborn little heart. Outside, the city stayed quiet. So, I did what I knew how to do. I kept talking. Chapter 3, Raw Call. I slept on the studio couch that first night because I was afraid to go back to my apartment, like the emptiness there would be more personal. The couch smelled like 100 late-night shifts and exactly one tragic chili incident. I pulled a station hoodie over me and listened to the building hum. The automation kept playing music through the night because machines are loyal like that. At 2013 a.m., I woke up convinced I'd heard someone walking down the hall. It was the ice maker. In the morning, I made a plan. It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan, and plans are how you trick fear into holding still long enough to be useful. Step 1. Find people. I grabbed a notepad from the office and wrote in big letters, places people would be. Under that, I made a list like I was trying to win a prize for most obvious thoughts. Police station, hospital, fire department, TV station, airport, stadium, mall, because if the world ends, at least one person will be in a mall. I also wrote, any place with donuts, because I'm nothing if not consistent. I took a stack of station bumper stickers, JLT T2327 in angry neon letters, and a fat marker. On each sticker I wrote, if you're alive, tune to 1003.7 BN. Then I set out like a very underqualified census worker. The streets looked worse in daylight, not because there was blood or fire there wasn't, but because daylight made the absence undeniable. Storefronts were open, cars were stopped mid-turn, a bicycle lay on its side in the middle of an intersection as if its rider had stepped off and forgotten to come back. I found a pair of shoes on the sidewalk outside a deli, just shoes, like someone had been walking and suddenly decided feet were optional. I did not like those shoes. I did not like what they implied. The police station downtown was unlocked. The lobby lights were on, and a radio somewhere crackled softly with nothing to say. The front desk had a stack of paperwork and a coffee mug that read World's Best Key, which I assumed had been won in a rigorous competition. I walked behind the counter and spoke loudly, because it felt important to give the world every chance to prove I was wrong. Hello? I called. Anybody here? This is... I almost said, Ben, like that would mean something. Instead I said, this is a citizen with a strong appreciation for authority and no current warrants. No one. I wandered through hallways of buzzing fluorescent lights. There were bulletin boards covered in notices, shift schedules, a flyer for a picnic. In the break room, a box of donuts sat on the table. I stared at it like it was a religious symbol. The donuts were stale, but in a world without humans, stale donuts are still donuts. I ate one and left a note on the box. To whom it may concern. I did not steal these. I am borrowing them in a time of crisis. VEN. Then, because I couldn't help myself, I found an empty ticket book in a drawer and wrote myself a citation. Ben Carter. Violation, being alive when everyone else isn't. Fine, 1-1, explanation. I stuck it in my pocket. Proof of life, issued by nobody. The hospital was worse. Hospitals are not quiet places. Even when you're just visiting, they're full of noises, intercom announcements, squeaky carts, footsteps, muffled crying, the constant beep of machines reminding you that bodies are complicated. This hospital was a museum. The automatic door still opened when I approached. The lobby was bright. A TV in the waiting area played static. A magazine rack held People and Time and something called Modern Bride, which felt like a cruel joke. I walked past an empty reception desk and down a hallway lined with rooms, curtains half drawn, sheets rumbled, a wheelchair angled toward a wall like it had been parked and forgotten. I pushed open a door marked Nursing Station. There were charts on a counter, coffee cups, a stethoscope coiled like a sleeping snake. No nurses. No patients. No one. In a pediatric room, a stuffed bear sat on a bed, propped against a pillow like it was waiting for someone to come back. I picked it up and immediately felt ridiculous for almost crying over a bear. Sorry, I told it, and put it back. I checked the cafeteria because my priorities are impeccable. The soup had congealed into something with boundaries. The salad bar looked like it had given up on being food. There were no flies. It hit me in a weird, delayed way. Even when the humans are gone, nature normally comes right in. Flies arrive, ants arrive. Somewhere a squirrel makes a career out of your trash. Here, nothing arrived. The hospital's fish tank in the lobby was empty. Not just, the fish died, empty. No water either, like the whole idea of fish had been removed. The plastic treasure chest at the bottom sat open, its little hinge frozen mid-gesture. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring into a tank that had become a perfectly clean rectangle of absence. I left another sticker on the glass. If you're alive, tune to 103.7 BN. I drove to the fire station, empty. The TV station, empty. The mall, not a teenager in sight. At the airport, the departures board still blinked flights that were never leaving. The loudspeaker played a looped announcement about unattended baggage, which made me laugh bitterly because now all baggage was unattended forever. On the runway, I saw a plane sitting like a sleeping whale. A set of stairs waited at the door. I did not go in. Something about a plane with no people felt like the kind of haunting you don't volunteer for. By late afternoon, my sticker pile was thin and my hope was thinner. I stood in the middle of a downtown intersection and did the most pointless thing I've ever done, which is saying something. "All right," I yelled. "If this is a prank, you got me. Mark, Mom, Mrs. Devine, Razor, I surrender. Come out and tell me the punchline." My voice bounced off empty buildings and came back at me like a stranger. I waited. Plows? Nothing. I climbed the steps of City Hall because if you're going to be alone, you might as well do it with dramatic architecture. The doors were unlocked, the marble floors shone, the flags hung limp. On a desk in the lobby, there was a guest book with a pen chained to it, like they were worried someone would steal a pen in City Hall. I flipped to a blank page and wrote, June 14, 1987. I am here. If you are also here, please find me. I have questions. Ben Carter. Then I drew a smiley face because I'm incapable of leaving a note without trying to soften it. I drove back to the station as the sun lowered, turning the empty city gold and beautiful in the most insulting way. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long minute with my hands on the steering wheel. Okay, I said to myself, either everybody vanished or everybody is hiding, and they're hiding with an impressive level of commitment. I looked at the station building, solid, familiar, full of wires and switches and systems I understood. I couldn't control why the world was empty, but I could control whether the light stayed on in one small corner of it. I picked up my bag, walked inside, and locked the door behind me. I'd never been much for home ownership, but it looked like I'd just inherited a radio station. Chapter 4. Shopping like a king. By day 3, Denial had packed its bags and left without saying goodbye. I was still doing broadcasts every hour. If you're alive, tune to 103.7. But my voice was starting to sound like a voicemail greeting, cheerful, tired, vaguely desperate. The practical problems arrived, as practical problems always do, with the confidence of a bill collector. Water, food, electricity, and the eternal question of every adult, where the hell did I put the batteries? The station had a generator in the back, meant to keep us on the air during storms and the occasional squirrel-related transformer incident. It ran on diesel. Diesel, I knew, didn't last forever. The generator didn't care about my emotional journey, it cared about fuel. So I made another list. Lists were my new religion. Ben's apocalypse, to do. 1. Don't die, preferably. 2. Secure water. 3. Secure food. 4. Secure fuel. Find out if I can legally declare myself mayor. 6. Stop talking to yourself in the third person, optional. I started with food because I'm human and therefore motivated by snacks. The nearest supermarket was a few blocks away. The automatic doors slid open when I approached, as if delighted to have a customer. Thank you, I told the doors. You're doing great. Inside, the place was lit and humming. The refrigeration units drummed steadily. Somewhere, a ceiling fan spun for no reason. A soft, instrumental version of a pop song played over the speakers, music designed to make you buy vegetables without thinking about your own mortality. The aisles were full. It was a shrine to abundance. And I was the only worshiper. I pushed a cart down aisle 1 and looked at the choices like someone had just offered me the entire world and asked me to pick dinner. I grabbed a box of cereal and immediately put it back because it felt wrong to start the end of humanity with Raisin Bran. I grabbed a bag of chips, then another, then a third, because if you're the last person alive, you don't have to pretend you have self-control. In the frozen section, I opened a freezer door and cold air spilled out like a blessing. Ice cream. I stood there and made a decision that I can only describe as morally complicated. I took 5 pints. Then I took 5 more. I will eat these responsibly, I lied. I wandered deeper into the store. I took canned soup, peanut butter, crackers, rice, pasta. I tried to choose reasonably, like I was shopping for a week. Then I remembered there were no more weeks, not in the way my old life had meant weeks. I loaded the cart until it looked like a doomsday parade float. I grabbed vitamins because my mother would haunt me if I died of scurvy in a supermarket. I grabbed coffee because I refused to meet oblivion uncaffeinated. Then I reached the meat section and stared. Packaged steaks, chicken, ground beef, bacon. A month ago, I would have felt guilt about eating bacon. Now I felt guilt about letting bacon go to waste. I took as much as I could and pushed the cart toward the front. The registers waited in a neat row, cash drawers closed, conveyor belts still. Behind them, the cigarette shelf stared at me like a wall of bad decisions. I stood there with my cart and realized I'd reached a new, unfamiliar frontier, checkout without a cashier. I stepped behind the register and tried to remember what I'd seen cashiers do 1,000 times. I pushed buttons. The register beeped in protest. I pulled open the drawer. It slid out with a clack. Inside was a tidy stack of bills and coins, like someone had just stepped away to break up a fight over coupons. Okay, I told the register, here's how this works. I'm going to take all of this food. You are going to pretend you scanned it, and then I'm going to pay you with what exactly? The concept of money? The register did not respond, which is rude in customer service. So I did what I always do when faced with a complicated system. I simplified it until it became a joke. I wrote myself a receipt on a piece of paper. Ben Carter. 1. Onwin. Apocalypse. Total. Everything. PAIS. I stuck it in the drawer like it mattered. Then, because my brain is a raccoon that likes shiny things, I opened the manager's office. There was a wall of keys, a safe, a clipboard with schedules. The clipboard had a note clipped to it. Don't forget, inventory tomorrow. Buddy, I said to the absent manager, I have bad news about tomorrow. I took the keys and, after a moment's hesitation, took the clipboard too. It felt like evidence, like proof that this place had been real. On my way out, I found the store intercom microphone behind the customer service desk. I pressed the button. The speakers crackled. Attention shoppers, I announced in my best professional voice. The store will be closing in never. Please take whatever you like and remember to smile at the nothingness. My voice echoed down empty aisles. I laughed, and the laugh sounded sharp in the quiet. Back at the station, I unloaded groceries like I was stocking a bunker for a very picky bear. I filled cabinets, I stacked cans, I arranged my ice cream in the freezer with reverence. Then I started on water. The station's taps still ran. I didn't know how long that would last. Water systems need people, even if those people are mostly invisible to the rest of us. They need pumps, pressure, maintenance, someone to flip a switch when something goes wrong. So I filled everything. Every pot, every bottle, every empty coffee carafe. I filled the station's big blue water cooler jug and 3 empty soda bottles and a suspiciously clean trash can I found in the supply closet. I labeled them in marker. Drinking waiter. Probably drinking waiter. Absolutely not drinking waiter. I also raided the hardware store for tools and duct tape because if you've never fixed something with duct tape, you've never been truly alive. By the end of the day, my arms were sore and my brain was buzzing with the strange satisfaction of having done something useful. In the evening, I went back on the air. This has been, I said. Day? I don't know. The days are already getting weird. Good news, I have secured approximately 47 years worth of peanut butter. Bad news, still no people. Also, I tried to pay for groceries with a handwritten receipt, and I'm pretty sure I just committed capitalism. I paused, listening for any sign that my voice wasn't disappearing into the void. Nothing. I swallowed and pushed on. I'm going to keep broadcasting, I said. If you're out there and you're listening, I'm at Jolt 103.7. Bring batteries. I have ice cream, but my fortunes are going to get less friendly as time goes on. Then I played music. Loud music. Music that filled the building and spilled out into empty streets like a defiant, ridiculous flag. It didn't make the world less empty, but it made the emptiness less quiet. Chapter 5, Breaker 1-9. On day 6, I realized I couldn't keep searching the same 10 square miles and expecting the universe to get embarrassed and produce people. Also, I was running out of novelty canned goods in my immediate radius, and boredom is a dangerous thing when you're the only person who can talk you out of stupid decisions. So I planned a road trip. There's something wonderfully 1987 about planning a road trip. No GPS, no cheerful voice telling you to recalculate, just a glove compartment full of folded maps, a highlighter, and the smug belief that you understand the concept of north. I spread maps across the studio floor and drew a circle around Pittsburgh. Then I drew a bigger circle, then another. My circles got more desperate as they grew. I wrote a route that hit nearby towns, hospitals, police stations, and anything marked with a big star. Big stars, in my experience, mean one of two things. 1. Tourist traps. Human activity. At this point, I was open to both. I loaded my sedan with supplies, water, peanut butter, a toolbox, spare belts, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a shoebox full of cassette tapes, because if I was going to die alone on the side of the road, I wanted a soundtrack. Then I found a CB radio at a truck stop and mounted it under the dash with the confidence of a man who had watched other men do it. For those of you who have never used a CB radio, here's what you need to know. It exists so truckers can warn each other about traffic, cops, and existential despair. I turned it on, and the speaker hissed. Stegari. I tapped the mic. Breaker 19, I said, trying to sound like I belonged in a denim jacket. Anybody got their ears on? This is Ben. I waited. Static. Okay, I tried again, because persistence is my only superpower. This is Ben Carter. I'm looking for anyone. If you can hear me, respond. Over. Nothing. I drove anyway. The highway was a long, empty ribbon. Cars sat abandoned in strange positions, pulled onto the shoulder, stopped in the fast lane, angled against guardrails. A few had collided, not violently, but enough to suggest someone had let go of a steering wheel and never come back. I passed a station wagon with its driver's door open and a child's booster seat in the back. I did not like that booster seat. I kept driving. Ever so often, I'd see a billboard advertising something that now felt like a message from a previous civilization. Combe to Kennywood. Minimally fun. I talked to the billboards like they were old friends. Yeah, I told one, family fun. I'm drowning in it. In a small town, an hour out, I stopped at a diner and pushed open the door. The bell above it jingled. The smell hit me grease and coffee and old fry oil, the perfume of America. No people? I walked behind the counter. The grill was cold. Plates sat stacked neatly. A jukebox in the corner was unplugged, as if someone had decided that even the music should stop. I plugged it in and dropped in a quarter. The jukebox clunked, lit up, and played a song that made the empty booths feel almost normal. I stood there and listened to it, alone in a diner, watching my reflection in the chrome. Then I did what I'd been doing everywhere. I left a note. If you're alive, tune to 103.7 BN. I stuck it to the cash register with a strip of tape like it might be the most important sign in the world. At a gas station, I tested the pump out of habit. No luck. The power was out. I stared at the dead pump and felt a small, private panic. The world didn't need people to be empty, it only needed people to be maintained. But I wasn't helpless. I was an engineer. I could jury-rig my way through life and then apologize for it later. Behind the station, I found a delivery truck. Diesel. I siphoned fuel into a can with a length of hose and the kind of grim determination that would have made my high school chemistry teacher faint. I got diesel on my hands and smelled like a truck stop for the next 2 days. It was, tragically, not my worst cologne. I drove until sunset and pulled into a motel. The neon sign still glowed, vacancy, which felt like a personal attack. I took the nicest room. I did not feel guilty about it. I turned on the TV. Static. Test pattern. Please stand by. I lay on the bed, listened to the hum of the motel's soda machine down the hall, and realized something that should have been obvious. No one was coming to check me in. No one was going to knock on the door. No one was going to complain about me stealing all the tiny soaps. It was freedom and horror in equal measure. In the morning, I kept going. I hit a hospital in a town I'd never heard of. Empty. I hit a fire station. Empty. I hit a church. Empty. In the church, the choir loft held dusty hymnals. A pair of reading glasses sat on the lectern. I tried praying. Hi, I said because I didn't know the proper greeting. It's Ben. If you did this, I'm not mad. I just want to know why. Also, if this is a test, please grade on a curve. The church stayed quiet. I suspected that if God was speaking to me, he was using a frequency I didn't own a radio for. On the third day of driving, I found a drive-in theater off a 2-lane road. The big screen stood in a field like a pale monument. The snack bar was locked, but the projector room wasn't. Inside, I found reels of film and a stack of VHS tapes for whatever they were showing that summer. I looked through them until I found something that felt right, a comedy. I dragged the projector out, set up the sound as best I could, and sat in my car facing the screen. I turned the volume up until it felt like I was doing this for an audience. The movie played, flickering in the open air. The jokes landed and evaporated. I laughed anyway. For 90 minutes, the world was a world again, made of punchlines and people pretending their lives mattered. When it ended, the screen went blank and the field returned to silence. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing, and tried the CB one more time. "Breaker 19, I said softly. "Anybody out there?" Static. I drove back toward Pittsburgh with a map full of circles and a stomach full of no-tell coffee. I had checked towns and highways and hospitals and churches. I had left notes everywhere like breadcrumbs for a trail no one was walking. By the time the station sign came into view, JLT 10327 buzzing stubbornly against the dusk, I didn't feel relief so much as I felt resignation. If there were other people, they were very good at hiding. Or they weren't people anymore. Either way, my road trip had given me the world's least exciting souvenir. Confirmation. Chapter 6, Where the Animals Aren't. There are only so many empty buildings you can walk through before your brain starts inventing ghosts just to have something to do. After the road trip, I found myself craving a different kind of proof, a different kind of life. I told myself, surely the animals are still here. Surely, even if every human had vanished, the world would still have birds and dogs and squirrels and the little fat pigeons that look like they've made peace with their own mediocrity. I wanted that. I wanted to hear something living that wasn't my own voice. So on a bright morning that felt too cheerful for the end of everything, I drove to the zoo. The parking lot was empty, which should have been my first warning. Zoo parking lots are never empty. They are filled with minivans and spilled popcorn and the sound of parents telling children that no, they cannot keep the monkey. I walked to the entrance. The ticket booths were vacant. The turnstiles waited politely. On the gate, a sign hung at an angle. Dalgam. I pushed through and stepped into a place that was designed for noise. Zoos are supposed to be chaotic. Even if you can't see the animals, you hear them. You hear birds screaming, lions roaring, monkeys arguing about politics. This zoo had none of that. The first exhibit was the flamingos. The pool was still there, shimmering in the sun. The fake rocks were still arranged in a careful imitation of nature. There were no flamingos. I stood at the railing and stared like the birds might pop into existence if I waited long enough. No pink heads bobbing. No long legs. No ridiculous, elegant weirdos. Just water and silence. I walked faster, a stupid hope pushing me along. The penguin enclosure, empty. The bear grotto, empty. The tiger habitat, empty. The cages weren't full of dead animals. They weren't abandoned in a way that suggested escape. They were simply vacant, like the animals had never been there at all, except the signs still insisted they should be. I am your tiger. ST8s, endangered. EIMEET. Diet, existential dread, I muttered, and kept walking. At the primate house, I pushed open the door and felt the stale, warm air hit me. The inside smelled like old hay and bleach. The enclosures were empty and too clean, as if someone had erased the inhabitants with a careful hand. In the middle of the room was a large informational display about chimpanzees, their intelligence, their social structures, their tool use. I stared at it and felt a strange, twisting sensation in my chest. If the chimps were gone, if the birds were gone, if the fish tank in the hospital lobby had been empty, then it wasn't humans vanished. It was animals vanished. And I, Ben Carter, in my jeans and sneakers, with my peanut butter and my sarcasm, I was an animal. Which meant I had won a competition I never entered. Congratulations, Ben. First place in existing. I laughed out loud in the primate house, a short, sharp sound that made my own skin prickle. Well, I told the empty cages, I hope you're all enjoying wherever you are. I'm going to need you to send a postcard. Outside, I sat on the bench near the sea lion pool. The pool was still in blue, like a postcard of summer. I could almost hear barking. Almost. But the only sound was wind moving through leaves. Even that sound felt lonely, like the leaves were trying to entertain themselves. I walked to the petting zoo area because I am nothing if not committed to denial. The fence was intact. The little barn was empty. The sign that read, "Please wash your hands after touching the animals," now felt like it belonged in a museum called Things We Used to Worry About. I opened a gate and stepped inside. The hay smelled sweet, the troughs were clean, the water buckets were full but untouched. No goats, no sheep, no rabbits. I leaned on the fence and stared at the dirt as if expecting a hoofprint to appear out of sympathy. Nothing. At the exit, there was a big sign with rules. Please do not feed the animals. I took out my marker and added a line underneath. You unless you see any, in which case please call me immediately. Then, because I'm me, I signed it. T.N. As if my autograph would make the apocalypse feel more official. On the drive back, I stopped at an aquarium supply store, the kind of place that sells tanks, filters, and little plastic castles for fish to pretend they live in. The store was full of tanks. Every tank was empty. No fish, no snails, no algae, just clean glass and bubbles from filters that were still running, pumping life support into nothing. I stood there in a glow of blue lights and felt the last of my, maybe it's just Pittsburgh, optimism evaporate. This wasn't a local problem. This wasn't a radio tower went down problem. This was a biology took a day off problem. I went to the river next. If there were fish anywhere, there would be fish there. I stood on the bridge and looked down at the water. The river moved like it always had, dark and patient, sunlight glittered on the surface, it looked normal. Too normal. I watched for signs of life, ripples, splashes, gulls circling overhead. There were no gulls. In my entire life, I had never seen a river without birds. I leaned over the railing and yelled, "Fish," as if naming them would summon them like a spell. The river did not oblige. I went back to the station with my stomach hollow. That night, I sat in front of the microphone and didn't make a joke for a full 10 seconds, which is a personal record. "This is Ben Carter," I said quietly. "I went to the zoo today. There are no animals." Swallowed. I keep saying that like it's a weird fact, like it's trivia, but it's not trivia, it's the whole world. I forced myself to breathe, then did what I always did when the truth got too heavy. I found the edge of it and tried to make it bearable. "So," I said, and my voice steadied, "if you are listening and you are a human, congratulations. You are also an animal. I'm starting a club. Membership is exclusive and depressing." I put on a song, something loud and alive, and let it fill the room. I didn't know why I had been spared. I didn't know where everyone went. But I knew, with a clarity that felt like ice water, I was not just alone. I was the last thing that could laugh. Chapter 7. Classified. Boring. After the zoo, my brain demanded answers the way my stomach demanded peanut butter. I could accept being alone. Eventually, maybe, with enough denial and enough cassette tapes. What I couldn't accept was not knowing why. Not knowing is the worst kind of loneliness because you can't even argue with it. You can't call it names. You can't punch it in the face. You can only sit with it while it stares back. So I went hunting for explanations in the only places I knew to look. 1. The library. 2. University. 3. Anywhere with a lock that looked government-issued. The public library downtown was one of my favorite buildings even before the world decided to stop being populated. It smelled like paper and dust and quiet ambition. It had high ceilings that made you feel like your thoughts were important just for having happened in there. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped inside. No librarians. No patrons. No shh from a woman in a cardigan. I wandered through the stacks like I owned the place, which I suppose I did now, along with every other building and every other awkward memory in the city. I found the periodical section and pulled out newspapers from the week before June 14th, headlines about politics, sports, the stock market, movie reviews. Nothing about impending total vanishing. I checked the microfiche machine, because I am an adult, and therefore enjoy machinery that makes me feel like a detective. I loaded a reel and squinted at tiny, grainy headlines. Still nothing. If the world was going to end, it had done it without leaving a press release. I found books on mass hysteria, books on cults, books on solar flares, books on the bubonic plague. None of them had a chapter called, "And Then Everybody Just Disappeared," including the flamingos. In the science section, I pulled down anything with words like quantum or anomaly on the spine, because when you don't know what happened, you start trusting words that sound like they were invented to win arguments. I sat at a long wooden table and read until my eyes crossed and my brain felt like wet bread. I learned about particles and waves and weird experiments where light behaved badly when people watched it. I considered the possibility that my entire life was an observation. Then, I decided I was hungry and stopped considering it. At the university, the campus was eerily pretty. Green lawns, empty benches, a frisbee lying in the grass like it had been dropped mid-throw. I went straight to the physics building because if anyone could vanish reality, it would be physicists. The lab doors were locked, which annoyed me until I remembered that locks were the only remaining authority in the world. I found a janitor's keyring on a hook in a hallway. I used it like a responsible citizen and also a criminal. Inside the lab, the equipment sat as if waiting for students to return. Oscilloscopes, coils, computers the size of mini-fridges. On a chalkboard, someone had written equations that looked like a language from another planet. Under the equations, in smaller handwriting, was a note. "Don't touch the coil, it bites." I laughed. "Great," I told the chalkboard. "Even in the last days, the lab humor survives." In an office, I found a stack of papers labeled Project Hush. My heart did a hopeful little leap, which it did not deserve. I flipped through the folder, expecting diagrams, warnings, maybe a convenient confession. The first page was a meeting agenda. The second page was a budget request. The third page was an attendance sheet. I sat down and read all of it anyway, because when you're the last human, your standards for excitement collapse. Project Hush turned out to be a proposal for soundproofing the lab so they could run an experiment without interference. I stared at the words, "reduce ambient noise," for a long time. "Congratulations," I told the absent scientists. "You succeeded." I found a logbook with entries dated up to June 13th. It described equipment calibration, test runs, a power fluctuation at 3017 a.m. 3009 a.m. I froze. Something in my memory clicked. That first morning, I'd glanced at my clock when I woke up from a panic dream. It had been 3117 a.m. exactly. At the time, I'd thought, great, my subconscious is on schedule. Now I wondered if the world had hiccuped at 3017 and forgotten to put itself back together. I copied the logbook entries into my notebook. I drew the words "P-O-Wower" a fluctuation at the top and underlined them 3 times like that would make them more meaningful. Then I went looking for anything else dated June 14th. In a different office, I found a desk calendar with June 14th circled and a note that said, "Meeting, 9 a.m., donuts." It was the same cosmic joke as the station. It was like the universe was laughing at me from behind a filing cabinet. I drove to a federal building downtown next, because if anyone had answers, it would be the people who always seemed to know things 5 minutes after everyone else. The lobby was grand and empty. Metal detectors stood like bored robots. Flags hung. A portrait of the president watched me with the unblinking patience of printed paper. I walked through offices full of typewriters, filing cabinets, and stacks of memos that had never been sent. Every desk had the same small tragedies: a cardigan draped over a chair, a cup of cold coffee, a sticky note that said, "Call Mom." In one office, a fax machine still sat loaded with paper. I pressed the button and listened to it whine, dialing into nowhere. "Send my regards to the void," I told it. In the basement, behind a door labeled "Authorized Personnel Only," I found a room with a big red button on a panel. There was a sign above it, "Do not press." If you have never been alone on Earth, you might not understand what a sign like that does to a man. I stared at it. I thought about my mother. I thought about the zoo. I thought about the fact that the last authority on Earth was a laminated warning label. I pressed the button. Nothing exploded, no sirens, no secret doors opened to reveal a room full of people applauding. A single light on the panel turned on. It read, "Button pressed." I laughed until I had to sit down. "Thank you," I wheezed. "Thank you for this. This is the level of government competence I've been missing." On my way out, I found a taped envelope on the wall. It was labeled "Emergency Instructions." My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper that said, INCA emergency, TRECOM, follow supervisor's instructions. My supervisor was gone, the city was empty, and the flamingos had apparently joined a witness protection program. I folded the sheet carefully and put it in my pocket anyway. That night at the station, I sat in front of the microphone and told my invisible audience about my discoveries. "Good news," I said. "I found government emergency instructions. Bad news, step 2 is follow supervisor. I would like to speak to the manager of reality." I paused and looked at the blinking lights on the board. "Also," I added, quieter, "I found a logbook with a power fluctuation at 3017 a.m. If you are out there and you know what that means, please call me. I will trade you peanut butter for explanations." No call came. But for the first time in days, my mind had something new to chew on besides loneliness. 3010 a.m. A timestamp in a world that had stopped keeping time. Chapter 8. The Council Convenes. The human brain is a social organ. I know that sounds like something you'd read in a psychology book right before the author tries to sell you a seminar, but it's true. After a few weeks of being alone, my thoughts started to feel like they were pacing in a cage. I talked to myself constantly, out loud, without shame, because shame requires witnesses. I narrated what I was doing. I made jokes and laughed at them, which is either charming or a sign I should be supervised by professionals who no longer existed. I also started answering myself. That was when I knew I needed a strategy. Not a find other human strategy. I had done that. I had driven highways, checked hospitals, prayed in churches, pressed suspicious government buttons. I needed a don't become a feral radio goblin strategy. So I went to a department store. If you've never been in a department store after hours, it's already unsettling. The mannequins look like they're planning something, the escalators groan, the air smells like perfume and fluorescent lighting. If you've never been in a department store when the entire world is empty, it's less unsettling and more, I am absolutely being judged by the pants display. I rode the escalator up and found the mannequins arranged in neat little poses, a couple in matching sweaters, a woman in a power suit, a man in a blazer who looked like he'd never relaxed in his life. I stood in front of them with my hands on my hips like a director casting a play. All right, I said, I need people who can handle long hours, low pay, and the occasional breakdown. Benefits include no more taxes. None of them objected. I chose 3. This was not random. I made criteria because I am the kind of person who makes criteria for insanity. Mannequin 1, a woman in a red dress with a confident posture. She looked like she'd be good at telling me to drink water and not eat ice cream for breakfast. Mannequin 2, a man in a brown sport coat with a permanently concerned expression. He looked like he'd say, "Are you sure that's safe?" which I needed. Mannequin 3, a teenager mannequin in a denim jacket who looked like he'd roll his eyes at everything. Also necessary. I loaded them into a shopping cart and wheeled them down the escalator, apologizing to every display I'd bumped. I'm borrowing these, I told the empty cashier stands, for civic duty. Back at the station, I introduced them to the studio. Welcome, I said, gesturing grandly. This is your new home. The coffee is terrible, the music is excellent, the audience is non-existent. I set them up in the spare production room and stood back to assess. They looked like a hostage situation. So, I improved it. I found a stack of folding chairs and arranged them in a semicircle like a panel show. I made name placards out of index cards. I wrote, Linda, because she looked like a Linda. Some people have faces that come pre-labeled. I wrote, Etamar, PEA body, because the man in the sport coat looked like he'd own a briefcase full of polite disappointment. I wrote, SKIP, because the teenager mannequin looked like he'd skipped school just to be annoyed about it. I set up the microphone and checked my levels like it was the most normal thing in the world to host a talk show for mannequins. Then I did it. Good evening, Pittsburgh, I said into the mic. This is Ben Carter, and tonight on Jolt 103.7 we have a very special panel. Say hello to Linda, Mr. Peabody, and Skip. I clapped softly. The clap echoed. They're shy, I explained. It's their first time on radio. I reached over to the cart machine, the old system we used for playing jingles and commercials. It had big buttons and labeled slots for little cartridges of tape. It felt like operating a spaceship from a low-budget movie. I recorded 3 short phrases in different voices and loaded them into carts. Linda, Ben, please drink some water. MR, PEA body, is that wise? Skip, whatever. It took me an hour to get the timing right, and during that hour I laughed so hard I had to sit on the floor. Once it worked, I did an interview. Linda, I said, how are you handling the end of the world? I pressed the button. Ben, please drink some water, Linda replied to the speakers, perfectly calm. I nodded gravely into the mic, an important reminder from our guest. Thank you, Linda. Mr. Peabody, I continued, what do you think caused everyone to vanish? Is that wise? Mr. Peabody asked. Excellent point, I said. We may never know. Skip? Whatever, Skip said, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I added a laugh track by feeding in a tape of an old sitcom I'd found in the break room. The canned laughter sounded like another species, but it helped. It made my jokes feel like they landed somewhere, even if that somewhere was inside a magnetic strip. That night, I staged a full inauguration ceremony in City Hall. I'm not proud. I drove the mannequins downtown in the back seat like a weird family outing. I set them up in the council chambers. I stood at the podium and cleared my throat. We are gathered here today, I announced, to recognize the new mayor of Pittsburgh. I looked around at my silent audience and let the absurdity wash over me. Mayor Ben Carter, I said, has served this city faithfully by maintaining the only functioning radio station and not setting any major landmarks on fire. His platform includes keeping the lights on, finding out what happened, and not eating all the ice cream in 1 week. I placed a ceremonial key in my own hand, found in a display case in the lobby because City Hall, like everything else, had been designed with optimism. I raised it. Do you accept? I asked myself. Is that wise? Mr. Peabody's recorded voice echoed from a tape recorder I'd brought along. Thank you for your concern, I told him. It's too late. I turned to my mannequins and bowed. Madam Councilwoman Linda, I said. Councilman Peabody. Youth Representative Skip. Skip did not applaud. Afterward, I walked back out into the street and looked up at the buildings. My laughter faded, and for a moment, the quiet tried to climb back in. But something had changed. I wasn't pretending the mannequins were real. I wasn't delusional in that way. I was giving my brain a shape to hold on to, a routine, a little theater to keep me from dissolving into silence. On the drive back, I talked to Linda about civic responsibilities. We should probably discuss sanitation, I said. Ben, please drink some water, Linda replied, steady as ever. A fair point, I admitted. The city's first priority will be hydration. At the station, I ended the night's broadcast with a flourish. If you're listening out there, I said, you missed a historic moment. I've been elected mayor by a unanimous vote of mannequins. I am willing to step down if you can prove you're real and also bring me a dog. I paused and felt the old ache in my chest. No animals, I added softly. I keep forgetting. Then I pressed play on a song and let it carry me into sleep. Somewhere inside the station, the machines whirred and clicked and kept doing what they'd been built to do. And for a few hours, the world sounded almost populated. Chapter 9. The Signal That Lied. Loneliness makes you superstitious. After enough weeks of nothing, every creak becomes a footstep, every flicker becomes a message, every random noise in the radio static becomes a syllable you swear you recognize. I started sleeping with a portable radio next to my head like it was a teddy bear. Most nights it gave me the same thing, hiss, crackle, and the occasional faint bleed from our own transmitter. I'd fall asleep to the sound of electricity not giving me what I wanted. Then, one night in late October, I heard a voice. It was faint and tinny, but it was a human voice, a real one, not Razor's pre-recorded shout, not my own echo through the monitors. I sat bolt upright so fast I almost headbutted the radio. The voice said something that made my heart leap and my skin go cold at the same time. Tune 103.7. My frequency. I grabbed the radio with both hands like it might fly away. The voice continued, crackling through static. This is Ben Carter, if you're alive, tuned to 103.7. I froze. That was my message. But it wasn't coming from my transmitter. I knew my transmitter. I knew how it sounded, how it hit the room, how it sat in the air. This was coming from somewhere else. Somewhere out in the dark, my words were being repeated back to me like a joke told by someone you can't see. I ran to the studio and threw on the board lights, my bare feet slapping the tile. I turned down our output. I switched the transmitter off for a full minute. The voice on the portable radio kept going. My message. My name. My frequency. But not my transmitter. I felt a wild, stupid hope ignite in my chest. Someone had heard me. Someone had recorded me. Someone was rebroadcasting my message. Maybe there were other people after all, quiet people, cautious people, people who hadn't found my station yet but had found my words. I grabbed a handheld tape recorder and started talking into it as I threw on clothes. October 28th, I said, voice shaking. There is a signal repeating my message. If this is another person, I'm going to, I don't know, I'm going to hug the air. I'm going to cry. I'm going to complain about my deodorant situation. I am leaving now. I loaded the car with a toolbox and a portable antennae built out of scrap aluminum and optimism. A simple directional setup, nothing fancy, but enough to help me point at a signal and pretend I was a professional. Outside, the city was blacker now. The grid had started to fail in places. Some streetlights still burned, others didn't. The dark patches made the empty streets feel less like a city and more like a cave system. I drove with the radio on the passenger seat, volume cranked. The signal came and went. I followed it like a man chasing a firefly in a hurricane. At the first hill outside the city, it strengthened. My heart hammered. I pulled over, set up the antenna on the roof of the car, and rotated it slowly. The signal peaked when the antenna pointed north. North it was. I drove. The farther I went, the clearer the voice became. "This is Ben Carter," it said. "If you're alive, tune to 103.7. Hearing myself say my own name over and over started to feel less like hope and more like haunting. Still, I drove. The road climbed into wooded hills. Trees crowded in, darker and thicker than they'd been in summer. Without animals, the woods felt like scenery, beautiful, silent wallpaper. Eventually, the signal became strong enough that the static fell away. I could hear my own voice perfectly. And underneath it, faintly, I could hear another sound, a mechanical hum, a tone, steady and indifferent. I crested a hill and saw it. A small fenced compound with a squat building and a metal tower bristling with antennas. A service road led up to a gate. There was a sign on the fence. CO Unity Emergency Communications. Authorized personnel only. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I almost did both so hard I would have invented a new bodily fluid. I cut the fence with bolt cutters because I was, by definition, authorized now. I walked up to the building and tried the door. Locked? Of course. I found a window and pried it open. Inside, the room smelled like warm electronics and stale air. Racks of equipment blinked in the dark. A backup battery system hummed like a sleeping animal that I had apparently replaced. A cassette deck sat in the middle of it all, connected to a transmitter. On the deck, a tape label. Emergency message loop. My stomach sank. I pressed play. My voice filled the room. Not live, not responding, not from another person. A tape. My tape? At some point, my broadcast had been picked up by this emergency system, maybe as part of a monitoring setup, maybe because I'd accidentally fed it into a relay channel when I was fiddling with frequencies like a madman, and it had recorded it. Then, when the main feed went down, it had defaulted to looping the last recorded emergency message, which was me telling the world to tune to me. I had become my own emergency. I stood in that little building, surrounded by blinking lights and my own repeated plea, and the hope in my chest deflated with a long, tired sigh. For a full minute, I just listened to myself. "If you're alive," I said from the tape, bright and determined. I stared at the machine. "I am alive," I told it. "You can stop now." The machine did not stop. I laughed, because if you don't laugh, you start punching emergency equipment, and that's not a good look for the last human. "Okay," I said to the empty room. You got me so good." I sat on the floor and put my head back against the wall. My tape voice kept going, cheerful as ever. I listened to it like it was another person. Then I did something that surprised me. I got up and rewired the system. If the universe wanted to play my message back at me, fine, I could use that. I recorded a new tape right there in that building, a message meant for someone who wasn't me. "This is Ben Carter," I said into the microphone. "Steady now. If you can hear this, I'm in Pittsburgh at the Jolt 103.7 station. I had supplies, power, and a truly irresponsible amount of peanut butter. Also, if you're not human but you're listening, please be cool about it." I paused. "If you are hearing this because you found an empty world," I added, "I'm sorry. You're not crazy. It's real. Come find me anyway." I labeled the tape carefully and set it to loop. Then I left the little compound and stood outside under the cold stars. The world was still silent. No owls, no crickets, no dogs barking at the night. Just my car cooling in the darkness and my own breath. I drove back to the station in a strange, calm mood. The signal had lied, but it had also given me a gift, a new job. If I couldn't find people, I could at least leave breadcrumbs that lasted longer than paper notes in the rain. Back at the station, I started making tapes. I recorded my story in order. I recorded jokes. I recorded practical instructions, how to siphon diesel, where to find keys, which grocery store had the good canned peaches. I recorded a map description in case someone else was wandering through an empty city with nothing but confusion and a sore throat. I labeled each tape in neat marker. Tape 1, what happened, sort of. Tape 2, where to find food. Tape 3, How Not to Die Stupidly. Tape 4, Jokes Important. When I was done, I stacked them on the desk like a deck of cards and looked at them. Maybe no one would ever listen. But for the first time since June, I felt like I was talking forward instead of just talking into a void. And that, in a world without anyone to answer, was almost enough. Chapter 10, A Last Call, 1987. By December, the city had started to look like it belonged to plants. Vines crawled up chain-link fences, weeds pushed through cracks in sidewalks like they'd been waiting years for permission, in the empty lots, saplings appeared, hopeful and rude. Without people, nothing got trimmed. Without animals, nothing got nibbled. So the green just took. Some mornings I'd wake up at the station and swear the trees had moved closer overnight, inching their way down the streets like curious neighbors. The power grid had become unreliable. Entire neighborhoods went dark for days at a time. Streetlights failed one by one. The city's glow, its constant comforting haze, thinned until the nights were black and sharp, full of stars I'd forgotten existed above Pittsburgh. I rationed diesel like it was a precious family heirloom. I ran the generator during the hours I needed it most, a few hours in the morning to recharge batteries, a few hours at night to broadcast, a few hours when it got so quiet that my thoughts started stomping around like toddlers. The rest of the time, I lived by daylight and flashlight. I got good at it. I got good at fixing things with whatever was on hand. I got good at siphoning fuel without swallowing it. I got good at cooking whatever I could find before it turned into a science project. I got good at loneliness the way you get good at an instrument, by practicing because you have no other choice. Linda, Mr. Peabody, and Skip remained excellent conversationalists. Razor remained very enthusiastic in pre-recorded form. The emergency repeater on the hill kept looping my message like a stubborn little lighthouse. I left tapes in the library, in City Hall, in the radio station, and in a watertight box on the roof of the tallest building downtown. I painted signs on sheets and hung them from overpasses. If you're alive, I'm here. JLT 2327. Ben Carter. I wrote it so many times, it started to feel like my full name was a sentence. I never got an answer. By the last week of December, I had accepted the weird truth with a steadiness that would have impressed my earlier self. I was the last human. Maybe the last animal. Definitely the last person who could pretend he knew what he was doing. On December 31st, I woke up with a thought that felt both ridiculous and necessary. I should throw a New Year's party. If the world was going to keep turning without anyone to notice, then I was going to notice. I was going to mark the moment. I was going to be the entire crowd. I spent the day preparing like an event planner who had lost his mind and his clients. I raided a party supply store for hats and noisemakers. I put a tall, ridiculous top hat on Mr. Peabody because he looked like he'd secretly always wanted one. I gave Linda a sparkly tiara. I drew a tiny mustache on Skip with a marker and immediately regretted it because he looked even more judgmental. I found a case of cheap champagne in the back room of a liquor store and brought it home like treasure. I drove to a fireworks warehouse outside the city because, of course, 1987 America had a fireworks warehouse and loaded my trunk until it sagged. Back at the station, I laid everything out on the roof: rockets, fountains, cracklers, anything that promised noise. I wasn't reckless. I set up buckets of water, I cleared flammable debris, I tested lighters and fuses. I did the kind of careful preparation you do when you can't afford an ambulance because ambulances require people. At 6 p.m., I powered up the generator and went on the air. "Good evening," I said, voice warm with practiced cheer. "This is Ben Carter, coming to you live from the last remaining city council that never disagrees with me. Tonight is December 31st, 1987. I paused and let the date hang there. "Which means," I continued, "we have survived the year. Humanity may have stepped out for a moment, but I'm still here, the station is still here, and I am pleased to announce that at midnight we will be having the loudest New Year's celebration in recorded history." I leaned closer to the microphone. If you're listening and you've been silent because you're scared, or because you think you're imagining things, you're not. You're not crazy. I'm here. I've been here all year. Tune in and at midnight celebrate with me. We can be lonely together. It's a start. No phones lit up. No new voice joined mine. But the words still felt right. I played music for hours, every big, bright song I could find. I danced in the hallway with a broom like it was a partner. I ate a dinner that consisted of canned peaches and something I told myself was a meal. At 11,014, I opened the champagne and poured 4 glasses. One for me, one for Linda, one for Mr. Peabody, one for Skip, who would have refused on principle. I raised mine anyway. To being here, I told them, to whatever this is, to not giving up just because the audience left. Mr. Peabody said from the cart machine. Is that wise? Absolutely not, I told him, but it's tradition. At 11,058, I went back on the air and began the countdown like a man hosting the most exclusive broadcast in existence. All right, I said, breath visible in the cold studio because I'd turned the heat down to save power. 2 minutes. If you're out there and you can hear me, get ready. This is your cue to stop standing by. The phrase hit me. Please stand by those color bars on my TV that first morning, as if the world had been buffering. I'd been standing by all year. I wasn't going to do it forever. At 11:59, I carried the microphone cable up to the roof and set a portable speaker near the door so my voice would still reach the transmitter. It wasn't elegant, but neither was the apocalypse. I stood over the fireworks like a general about to declare war on silence. Down below, the city was a field of darkness and faint shapes. The river cut through it like a black ribbon. The buildings watched, indifferent. I took a deep breath and spoke into the mic. 10, I said, and my voice went out into the night, into empty apartments and empty cars, into the world that refused to answer. 9. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer popped softly. The sound was tiny. It sounded embarrassed. 8. I struck the lighter in my hand. The flame steadied. 7. The sky above the city looked impossibly large. 6. I wondered briefly where everyone was, not in a painful way, in a curious way, like wondering where a friend went after leaving a party early. 5. I smiled because it was absurd to be doing this, and the absurdity had become my favorite tool. 4. I leaned down, touched the flame to the first fuse, and stepped back. 3. The fuse hissed, a tiny snake of light. 2. I lit the second. 1. At 0, the first rocket launched with a scream that made my heart leap. It exploded over the city in a burst of red and gold. I laughed so hard I choked. The second rocket followed, then a fountain, then a whole ridiculous cascade of noise and color that filled the sky and echoed off empty buildings. For a few minutes, Pittsburgh was loud again. Not with people. With proof that someone still cared enough to make a mess of the night. I stood on the roof, face turned upward, cheeks cold, eyes watering, and let the fireworks reflect in my glasses. When the last one sputtered out, the darkness returned slowly, like a curtain falling. The city fell silent again. But it wasn't the same silence. It had been interrupted. I went back downstairs, unplugged the microphone cable, and sat in the DJ chair one last time for the year. Happy New Year, I said softly. This is Ben Carter. If you're listening, I'm still here. I kept the lights on as long as I could. I looked at the phone lines, dark and patient. If you ever find this, I added, please don't judge me for making mannequins into a government. I did what I had to do. I smiled into the mic because smiling into a microphone feels ridiculous and yet somehow right. Good night, Pittsburgh, I said. Good night, world. You were weird. I liked you. I clicked off the mic. The on-air sign went dark. Outside, the stars burned quietly over an empty city. And for the first time since June, I didn't feel like I was standing by.